afternoon, lovelies. This is my most recent video on what is Pompe and who found the diagnosis of Pompe. It was a Dutch pathologist, Dr. Jonas Pompe, in 1932. Pompe causes the accumulation of glycogen in the muscle tissue. The buildup of glycogen causes a progressive muscle weakness throughout the body. However, Pompe made the puzzling discovery that the enzymes involved in remaining excess glycogen was still present in the muscle cells. So I'm going to go brief on the kind of terminology and some of the scientific terms, research, but I'd like to make a separate video on this because when I've researched this, I kind of went on another worm of other information, which was quite interesting, which I'll go on to that. So it's great, talks about like crim negative and crim positive comparison. Some babies with crim positive, which they produce residue of GAA enzyme activity. At least 1% of the babies who don't produce the anti-RhGAA antibodies have a better response to the ERT, which is enzyme replacement therapy. So I will go into more depth with this because this got really interesting, and I think my son is in the criteria of, I know he's crim positive, but he does have a high rate, produce a high anti-RhGAA antibodies, have a better response to it, which is kind of good, which is luckily good, but still, yeah, reading into it, it got a little bit scary, so I do just letting you understand that. So with the Pompe, I'm going to just go straight to the whole information that I've collected with Dr. Pompe. So in 1932, Dr. Joan, again, not Dutch, I'm dyslexic, I do apologise with my wording, how I'm speaking, if I say words wrong, but I will have a picture to kind of upload it and let you see the actual name because I am pronouncing it wrong and I do apologise, and I know I'm going to get stick for this. So, probably his first name, Johannes Carcinus Pompe. His last name was Pompe. A Dutch pathologist described the disease in a 7-month-old infant who died of idiopathic hydropathy of the heart. Again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a specialist, I'm a parent, so I do go into some of the information of what this is, and I will upload a pictogram or a diagram of what these terminology means so you guys can understand what I'm saying. Dr. Pompe made the crucial observation that the baby's symptoms were associated with a massive vacuolar glycogen storage in the virtually tissues. Reports of a similar case appeared in a literature the same year, 1932. Putzgar. Again, I'm not Dutch. I'm trying to understand Dutch. It's very Dutch words. I don't know. So I do apologise. 1932. That's what it's referencing from. That literature. I'll also add the link to that. By the Nazis for hiding and transmitting in his lab, and used to send messages to the UK on behalf of the resistance. He and 19 others were executed 2 months later at the reprisal for the destruction of the railway bridge by the resistance. This held back the research and the progress of Pompe disease by 50 years. Imagine how far we could have now. Whereas in 2010, we only then got the enzyme replacement trial. So 2010 was officially legally trialed this enzyme replacement therapy with the research of Pompe disease, and my son was only diagnosed in 2014. So if my son was born before 2014, before 2010, which is only 4 years after, he wouldn't have survived. And it's just very, wow, it's shocking. Imagine if that man didn't die and he continued to do his research. How far would we or wouldn't we maybe have progressed with some cure or some better treatment by now with Pompe disease? But because obviously he got killed by the Nazis, it completely, it just put that research on the shelf, because yeah, it's really, really mad. But they were taken in a sealed truck to a meadow near, again, don't know the words, but I have got pictures of the locations for you to look at. Span Chris, oh my god, I'm sorry, I've just offended you with the wrong word and all this. 9 p.m, 15th of April, he was shot in 2 groups. The bodies were buried in a mass grave. Cassans Pompe was born in Utrecht on 9th of September 1901. He studied the medicine at the University of Utrecht, and during this time came across the symptoms of what we know as infantile Pompe disease. The 7-month-old who passed away with pneumonia, he found in post-mortem an enlarged heart, now known as the characteristics of infantile Pompe disease, and had a microscope slides prepared to do that research. These showed the muscle tissues was distorted into an oval mesh. He realized after a detailed examination that this appearance was due to the accumulation of something forcing the muscle tissue to distort. In that way, this isn't as obvious as it appears now. He then tried to discover what accumulated substance was and had the idea that it might be glycogen. So I think what I was trying to say in that net thing was, like, it was like an example with the fish net. Putting air into a fish net is not gonna, but then having fish nets in it with air going through with fish in it is the glycogen storage disease. Is like the fat, salts and sugars getting stored into that fish net, and then it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what that metaphor is. Dr. Pompe and Dr. Van Creveld published a paper in 1928 describing what is now known as von Guericke disease, or English term, glycogen storage disease type 1. Prior to the 7-month-old passing, Dr. Pompe and his co-workers encouraged him that there was a second type of glycogen storage disease, also an inborn error of metabolism. This is where they start to do the type 2. Dr. Pompe graduated in 1936 in subject of cardiomyopathy, glycomelia. So with the heart, basically. To do with the heart and glycogen storage disease, as a simpler term that I'm saying now. I just really struggle reading words. I shouldn't be doing a YouTube channel if I'm, I can't even read the script properly. This shows that Dr. Pompe was committed into continuing with his studies on the disease Pompe. Obviously, he wasn't diagnosed as Pompe yet. Well, named Pompe. He worked in a hospital in Amsterdam called Hospital of Our Lady in 1936 until 1939. Following the fall of the Netherlands, Dr. Pompe became involved with the Dutch resistance. Again, I'm not good with my history. It was around, I think it was the Second World War. My husband has way more better knowledge with history than I am, but obviously he became part of the resistance and was very known to rescuing, freeing the Jewish community from, obviously, Hitler. Pompe's lab was isolated from the rest of the hospital. At this time, he only had 2 co-workers in the daytime. This was the suggestion of hiding a transmitter in his lab, because it was so isolated and there was no one there. It was a perfect location for them to, you know, transmit information to the UK. During the raid, Dr. Pompey had been at a Sunday mass. On the returning to the hospital, he was warned by his patients of what had occurred. So the Nazis had raided the lab, had raided the hospital, and found his transmitter. Basically, he went home to tell his wife that he had needed to go into hiding. While leaving, sadly, the house, he was arrested in front of his wife and children, who were then threatened with rifles. That must have been very scary, especially when, you know, you're doing the right thing, you know, very scary. And it's just a shame. This amazing person has just ended up losing his life. Yeah, he lost his life to it. It's quite sad. I mean, yeah. So when that happened, they were taken in a sealed truck to a meadow near Stapacras, and 9 p.m. 15th of April was shot in two groups. The bodies were buried in the mass grave and Dutch Overdene. Again, I've got the link and I will show you the link. Caucasian Pompey was born, in Dutch, in their mass grave. It was very fascinating because he seemed to have had again, Leo was 7 months when he was diagnosed, and he was pretty much, again, I'll show you a picture, he was nearly on death's door at that point, Leo. And it's insane that he basically found an abnormally enlarged heart post-mortem. Post-mortem is when someone has passed away. You need to figure out how they died, why they died, if it's a crime, if it's like a homicide. They do an autopsy, basically, and an autopsy is just cutting the person open and seeing what went wrong, what happened, or if it's a natural cause or not natural cause. So when he did his research on that, it's very fascinating, but it's just a very shame that he had to end his life for doing something good. Obviously, we don't like Hitler. He's a piece of crap. So yeah, it's very small. It's only small information I could find so far on Pompey and him and his life and his history. It's very brief. It doesn't go into too much depth on the research that I've found so far, but it's insane. It took years to get this diagnosis. So it's another small video. I'm trying to keep things busy and keep it weekly posts as much as possible. I'll try and do more little mini videos, but the next conversation I'd really like to discuss is the more like the science behind it. So like the crim negative and the crim positive. I'm just gonna start by reading this little bit here. Is babies reduced with crim positive and crim negative. In comparison, the babies are crim positive. These are children with Pompe disease who have different strains of the Pompe disease. So it's like infantile Pompe, classic infantile Pompe, late onset infantile Pompe disease. So with classic infantile and infantile, you could make it past 1 without treatment. You won't die. You will die eventually without treatment, but you may last a little bit longer. With classic infantile, you won't make it past 1. You'll go. Sorry, the data for this. Patients were included because ITI regime was unsuccessful with the persistence of antibody titers. Crim positive / crim reactive immunologic material, crim negative and crim positive. So again, it's basically what I've just said, just in more smarter terms. But the enzyme replacement therapy was approved in 2006 in the USA. compared with CRIM-positive patients. CRIM-negative patients' serum verted faster after treatment initiation, developed higher sustained antibody titers, and were most likely to lose motor function and require a ventilator, which leads to the clinical decline that culminated in death. So a lot of the things that does affect these children is cardiac dysfunction. Late treatment of the enzyme replacement is a dilative component of the cardiomyopathy, which reduce the contractility resulting, so like the contracts when the heart goes in, the when it beats, it's when it loses that energy, basically that muscle, resulting in reduced exercise and tolerance of the cardiac heart failure. So the function of its heart basically failure may unmask during follow-up. Again, this information that I've got a website, it's linked to it, and it starts going into more detail, because I feel like if I'm talking about Pompe, the guy who founded Pompe, I'm going to go into a bit more of the information of the scientific terminology of what the enzyme replacement was. Again, there's a movie on it, on the Pompe, and it's called Extraordinary Measures. Brendan Fraser's in it. I like that film just because it does sort of speak volumes for some Pompe kids, like children like us. Tea's gone cold, I'm gonna have to make a new one. It does talk about some of the Pompe topics, it's more on set, because the father of those two children that got diagnosed, it was around the 2000s, they were on set because they've got infantile Pompe disease, but they're like 7, 6, they won't survive. If without treatment, they won't survive. And it's about in the movie, it's really heartwarming that he's trying to fight for his kids to go on this new enzyme replacement drug trial in America. And it's a good film. I'd give it a watch if you want to know more about Pompe disease. It's a picture of it for you there. Anyway, another issue to do with Pompe disease that affects the children is respiratory dysfunction. Not a lot of data. This is again data and information that I found on an article written by these doctors that are sharing the information via online. I will give the links, show you the information I've got. The data collected, but it seems because of the assist ventilation at a young age and by a concomitant marked orofacial weakness, making the measurements of the lung function paramount difficult. Pompe children with respiratory weakness use most of their inspiratory muscle force for their resenting ventilation and therefore have reduced exercise tolerance. This causes to an acute ventilatory failure during respiratory tract infections and chronic ventilatory failure, manifesting as a nocturnal hypoxemia. It's about like HYPOXMIA. I don't know what that word means. Not gonna lie. But in 2010, Kashani that the outcome of the CRIM-negative babies treated with ERT is similar to that of an untreated individuals and significantly poorer than the CRIM-positive subjects. So obviously it sounds quite harsh on the words in it, but it's again, it's how they document things. It's an actual website where it's just doctors sharing information, which I find really good and really interesting because there isn't a lot of research on it. Again, the guy that I researched on who founded Pompe, his last name was Pompe, and that's why it was named Pompe disease after this doctor who discovered it, sadly got killed. It's not a lot of information out there, and I'm trying to just bring it to YouTube and just bring it out there so people can listen and understand and learn and get more information out there and sharing. I'm even reaching out to some of the groups of asking what their children are, because like type of strains of Pompe disease, infantile Pompe disease, because a lot of them are onsets. I don't mean to be a negative person, but fuck it. I'm the mum who's going through this as well. It seems like the children who are classic infantile and infantile don't make it past, I don't know, I would say 12. There is one patient that I'm not going to say the name, obviously, for protection reasons. They were diagnosed quite early-ish on and had persistently had weekly treatments. They had weekly treatments every week for the rest of their lives, and that was their best chance to see how we can give them a good life expectancy and a good life. He went to college, he went to school, he had B's in science. So these children, as much as they are physically disabled with a ventilator, these people still their mind still functions. So it's just sad to see. They passed at 18. My son didn't get a good start. He's 7 months. He's still here, obviously. He was diagnosed at 7 months, which is classed as too late and quite late. And then they put him on a weekly, and he responded really well. And it was only when they changed him 6 months into his just diagnosis and being treated just for the first 6 months, they then reverted him to 2 weekly, and it was then he declined and ended up in ICU. And this is the concern I have as a parent, that again, there's not enough information out there, but what if now, because he was on 2 weekly for years, like 4 or 5 years, and we were fighting to get him to weekly. He's on weekly now. We fought a lot for him to go to the weekly now, but it took us 5 years to fight it. But then I feel like the damage is done at that point. Muscles don't come back. It's a lot of work to get back, and he did lose his motor skills. So he's CRIB positive, so he has a better chance in a way. But then he does have a high GAA, which is antibodies. So I don't know if that's antibodies, that it's like a 50-50 chance of rejecting the treatment that he's on now. He did start to reject the myozyme coming about a year or two away now. He's on the AVA drug. We call it the AVA now, not the myozyme. It is, the reason why they've done it is they say the vectors that have the enzymes get to the muscles properly and gets absorbed better, because most of the myozyme would get urinated out, and they're more concerned of, is this patient actually receiving the drug, or are they just urinating it out? And most of it's just getting peed out, which is expensive, because it's like 100,000 a year per child for the myozyme. They did the AVA because it's cheaper. Does not make me feel better when I hear that. It's like, okay, just because it's cheaper doesn't mean it's good. But they said because the vectors are a certain way, that it's more effective, because these vectors go straight into the muscle rather than the risk of them peeing all the enzymes out that they need. So Leo's been on this for about a year now, this AVA drug. It seems to be going well. It seems to be good. He's moving still. He's now not showing signs of rejecting the drug, I would say, because when he was on the myozyme 2 years ago, he was, every time he'd have the treatment, he'd go red. It wasn't as drastic, but he would go red while having the infusion. He'd have a high temp while having the infusion. He would respiratory occasionally struggle while having the infusion. But you know what? That makes me think. That was weekly. So when he was on weekly, because we fought to get him back on weekly, and then it was great for a year. And then he started showing signs on the weekly of rejecting it. Was that myozyme too much that it put the risk of Leo having more antibodies resistant because it was used to having 2 weekly, not weekly, for so many years? And then when he put more in, I, I don't know. It's just a theory in my head, but it's yeah, quite interesting. I'm going to go more into depth with the terminology in this. I hope this video is interesting. I hope you like this video. Please subscribe, because the more that I get subscriptions and likes and shares, the more I can continue to do this and actually share all the data, the information, have that out there for people to discuss and share their experiences, because I'm hopefully sharing my experience on this matter with my son being classic infantile, crib positive, and he has a high antibody GAA rate. So yeah, figuring it out makes sense. But yeah, I hope this video is interesting, gets shared. I will share more information on Leo and his progression and how he has deteriorated. He couldn't move at one point. So he used to be able to keep his head up, be vocal, lift his arms up, as you can see in the video I'll show. But then he lost it at about 6 months into the treatment, when he changed it to the 2 weekly. He started having chest infections that he couldn't fight off and colds that he couldn't fight off. And because he kept on hitting that wall, he got more weaker, and then he was more spent his time recovering in ICU, HDU, back on the BiPAP, needing the BiPAP machine in the night more in the day, which then led to him slowly declining. And then he got more tired, and then he just, as he got bigger, his arms became more heavier for him, so he couldn't move his arms as much. So the bigger these children get with this muscular weakness, the weaker the bones are, more prone to breakages and fractures, the weak muscles. As they get bigger, that tiny thin bone and that tiny muscle can't handle a bigger limb. So when it's not being already exercised, it's already given more pressure, which is what I've had issues in the past with the dietitians, because they're very like, well, normal children should be at this weight, normal children should have more calories, and it's like, okay, not gonna sound really offensive right now, but I am gonna sound offensive. Don't care. My son, he is not the normal anatomy of a normal child. He has this very complicated condition that needs to be assessed, because every child and every patient is different. Even with the disease, it's different for every child and every patient. That's why it's really hard to understand it in a sense. So I don't want him to put too much weight on, because then if he puts too much weight on, because he is a chunk now, he can't move. He won't be able to move. He won't be able to use his hands to enjoy things. He's very healthy now. He still is healthy, but I've had in the past dietitians kind of not connect the two and two together to go, okay, he's got weak bones, no muscles. Do we need to put more fat on him where he can't move? And the more fat you put on him and the more movement you do on him, the more prone to breakages. Because we've had times where we've just put his arm in his jumper and his arm snapped. It's just, it's getting that nice balance between the dietitians, the condition, the working together, so this person can have a good quality of life. And he does, but we had to learn these things as we go along, and we learned them as we experience these things, with just letting the dietitian make him be the average weight, which he shouldn't be the average weight. He should be a little bit underweight, I would say, so he can use his arms and use his limbs. He's still, he won't be tired. He won't be like, it's not starving them. He has a gastro, he has a milk, so he's still gonna get what he needs. He just doesn't need to get big. He's already a big lad. He's like 10 now, and he's like 6 foot nearly. He's really big. He's 10 and he's 6 foot nearly. That's a big kid. And people look at him and go, oh, he's what a nice young teenager. I think he's not even a teen. He's still, like, he's just 10. So he's a big lad. Luckily, the calories that they had forced on him, because he's tall, it kind of evens it out a bit. But that did give me the concern. Again, sorry with the cold. I've got a blocked nose. It's been hectic this year. So, yeah, this is the end of the video. I will go into more depth with the whole situation of our experience and a family living with pompe disease. Please like and share and subscribe, because this is what, again, like what I said before, allows me to do this stuff. I don't want to keep on doing this stuff, so I can keep on doing these videos, keep on raising awareness, and yeah, get all the data for everyone to share and learn. I will link to the information of all of this on my video. So thanks for listening and goodbye.